What follows is yours for free, but do have a look at all the other things we do on patreon.com/word in your ear. And now, on with the show.
Word in Your Attic, a Zoom with a view.
Welcome to another Word in Your Attic, and a great hero of ours who wrote the films That'll Be the Day and Stardust, and when he was at the Evening Standard interviewed absolutely everybody imaginable, the Beatles several times, the Stones, Muhammad Ali, Elvis Presley. We are genuinely weak with envy. It's tremendous. Ray Connolly. Ray, very nice to see you.
Thank you.
How are you? And where did we find you?
In Fulham, in London. Is that what you meant? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, in Fulham. Yeah. Yeah. And working away in my little room, you know.
Well, did you feel that being born when you were 1940 was the kind of dream ticket? Because, you were, 15 around the time of the birth of rock and roll?
I was born at the right time, which absolutely, there's no way out of it. I really was. But I had a very bad stammer and I didn't get anywhere. And at school, I wasn't very clever. I could do one thing. I could write quite well, but nothing else. So I wasn't clever. But when rock and roll came along, I became totally obsessed. Other people my age, John Lennon, for instance, exactly the same age, he had a band. He knew people who played in a band. I didn't know anybody who played anything. So, all I could do was buy the records and listen to Radio Luxembourg or AFN Munich, the American stations and things. And I knew everything there was to know about rock and roll. I just did. It was my hobby. It was my interest. And my great good fortune in life was to actually turn my hobby into my job, which was pure chance, but I did and made it, it helped.
Can you remember the
first
record you bought? Yes.
Sorry.
First record I bought, yeah, I can. And it was Pretty Little Black-Eyed Susie by Guy Mitchell, 78. Yeah. Mitch Miller produced it and written by Tuomi, I've forgotten that. Yeah. But mainly they were always written by Bob Merrill. He wrote thousands of songs for Guy Mitchell. And I first saw him at the Liverpool Empire in about 1951. My cousin took me, and I'd never seen a star before on stage, an American star. And to be in those days was incredibly important because they were cool and they had fancy cars and things. And so I went to see him, and then there was a thing called the Festival of Britain, and in Liverpool, which is about 15 miles, no less, 12 miles from where I lived, they had a sort of thing on the Mersey, and they had fireworks going off and everything. And a very friendly family across the road took us, because I had no father. My father died in World War II. So they took us to the Festival of Britain and to watch all the fairylight. And they played Guy Mitchell all night long. I think they played Christopher Columbus, Star in the Treetop, The Roving Kind, and that's about it. All night long. And I thought, this is the world. This is exciting. And then when Elvis came in 1950, I was sort of 15 in 56. When Elvis came, I was totally obsessed. I mean, really. I just carried on being obsessed.
Did you go for the look?
I didn't.
Any adjustment to the hair or anything?
No. Oh, God, no. I was very straight. No. I didn't even know he was good looking. It never really occurred to me he was good looking. And I can see it now, but when you're 15, I didn't think that. I just thought it was the echo and the sound of Heartbreak Hotel. And I'll just show you this.
Yeah.
I couldn't afford to buy. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Oh, first album, yes.
I couldn't afford to buy his first album, obviously. But I bought Heartbreak Hotel, but I couldn't buy it. And I'd go in the shop and ask them to play me one of the tracks. And I'd listen very carefully to it like that. And I'd say, no, it's not quite what I wanted. And go out. But in my head, I'd heard it. And I'd be listening to, whatever, I'm left, you're right, she's gone all day long in my head with the echo and the guitar. And, it was fantastic. And so I did that over and over again. Eventually I got that, but it took me years to buy the album.
When did you first meet people like John Lennon? Did you meet them around Liverpool in those days?
No, I didn't go to Liverpool at all. Liverpool was the place to go to to get the train to go to university. I was at the LSE, so I didn't know Liverpool. But then I got a job. My first job, really proper job, after the LSE was at the Liverpool Daily Post. And I was a sub-editor. And I think I was quite good at that, actually. But I wanted to write, and they wouldn't let me because, no, they need subs. Papers always need subs. They don't need writers. You can get them anywhere. So I began to write under another name called Simon Nielsen. And the first person I did was Roger McGuff, who was in the Scaffold then. And, and he's a friend since. And the second person, he then put me onto his mate, Mike McCartney, Mike, who's known as Mike McGear.
Mike McGear.
Yeah, so we did that, and I got on well with him. And then I sent these interviews. I did several interviews, and they weren't bad. And I sent them to the Evening Standard, and they sent me, go talk to them. And they said, "What's your real hobby?" I said, "Well, I really like rock and roll." Thinking they'd laugh and say, "Oh, well," I thought I was going to get a job as a sort of education correspondent. They said, "Well, why don't you do that then? We could do with someone who could do that." Because Maureen Cleave had been doing it before me, and she'd married and gone off to live in Peru or something. So there was a vacancy, and I just filled it perfectly. And so I made my hobby my job.
And the Evening Standard was huge, wasn't it? I mean, the sales of the Evening Standard at that time, what did it sell?
No, they were about 550, 600,000. With the Evening News, so more, over 1 million. But the Standard was read by everybody of any importance. You knew that whatever you wrote, we read that the entire government, every business, everybody, and people of my age too. You never brought the Evening News.
And was really valuable to musicians because it wasn't the music press, so they could put across broader cultural views about it. Was about relationships, wasn't it? It was about a lot of it was about the places they lived in. Was it that kind of thing?
Yeah. But I mean, I wasn't really a great interviewer. I was a great conversationalist. I'd listen to them. I think that's what it was. I didn't sort of go in and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and go out. I'd sit there all day. I mean, they'd have to kick me out at bedtime. I've got to go to bed, and in those days, they were pleased to see you. Rock stars wanted to meet you because you were their voice in the wider world.
Yeah.
And so I was lucky in so many respects. I was the right person at the right time. And also I knew that's the other thing, I knew about music. I did know about it. When I got involved with the Beatles, I could talk to them about the things they liked, where the other people on other papers, there were no rock correspondents. They were show business reporters who were much older, like 35, really old people. And they didn't know, they didn't have that wider knowledge of the business. So I could talk to, I remember, this sounds odd, but it's true. Being in a car with John Lennon in upstate New York, we were going to a Native American reservation. Don't ask me where, but we were. And we were in the car. Yoko was there in the middle, and John's there with me. And John and me, we were singing things like That'll Be the Day or Peggy Sue or whatever. And we're just going through our old favourites. We both knew, Ain't That a Shame, everything, arguing about that. And Yoko looked bored. And then Joe was sort of saying, if you'd been in my class at school, Ray, you'd have been in the quarrymen. And I said, my mother wouldn't let me join. She wouldn't let me go with us rough boys. He said, I'd have forced you to rebel against your mother. I said, well, I'm not sure I'd have done that, And Yoko looked really bored. And so I said, let's do whatever it was, the next one, Peggy Sue, Catherine. And John suddenly began singing and said, I'm not a fucking jukebox,
But was it difficult to develop a good relationship with the Beatles? Because everybody was trying to do it. So what was it about? How did you make that work? You got on particularly well with Paul and John, didn't you?
Yeah. I think the great lucky thing was because I'd known Roger McGuff and Mike McCartney in Liverpool. And that's right. And Paul's, Mike's dad, Jim McCartney, who was a really, really nice man. And on the Magical Mystery Tour, I was outside and they all went off down to and I'm in my little car following them. Didn't know anybody. And I'm really scared. And I'm sitting in the hotel where we're all staying, and they're all over there, all the stars and all the press and all the Sun and the Daily Mirror and all those things over there. And I'm over here thinking, how do we get from here to there? And suddenly this guy sits next to me, and it was Paul. And I thought, what shall I say? I've got Paul McCartney, what should I say? And I said, I know your dad. Bingo. That was the best thing to say, because he took me up instantly. Oh, you know my dad? Yeah. Do you know our brother? And so on. Do you know our Mike?
Yeah.
So that was it. And then he passed me on to everybody else. And then, yeah, I got on best of all with John, I imagine. And Ringo, you know. I never knew George. That was, in a way, I mean, I did know him. We'd talk to each other, but he didn't want to be interviewed by me. And I'm sure that's because he thought I was too close to John and Paul. And he was right. Yeah. I was. Right. And I made a mistake. Because
were there moments when you felt you had a genuine, I'm using an old-fashioned term here, scoop, you know, when there was something specific they wanted to say to you to get to the outside world?
Well, my big scoop was when John told me he'd left the Beatles. And he said, but don't tell anybody. So I said, oh, right. And I'm thinking, oh, don't do that. I love the Beatles. And they're a big thing. At the same time thinking, it's the best story of my entire life. And then he said, well, I'll let you know when you can put it out. We were in Canada. I'd gone to Canada with him. And he and Yoko were sitting on you were always on the bed with John in his bedroom. You'd always talk to him privately. And Yoko is sitting there. And I'm thinking, oh, God. Anyway, so I didn't. I mean, I did what he asked me. And I kept ringing, saying, can we? Not yet. Not until Alan Klein says, when Let It Be comes out, you can put it out. And then of course, Paul was hoping John would change his mind, and John didn't. So Paul makes his own album and puts out a statement. He never actually says, I've left the Beatles, but it was open, yeah. And there was headlines everywhere, and I'd missed the scoop. I'd missed the scoop. And I rang up John that day, and he said, why didn't you write it when I told you? I said, you asked me not to. He said, you're the fucking journalist, Connolly, not me.
Say that when it suits them. Yeah. But actually, when they did split up, I mean, you were rung up by various people to explain the announcement, weren't you? You were almost like an official spokesman.
Well, I did a lot of it, yeah. But you know, Paul still wasn't saying it. Paul was still being cagey, and it was being blamed all around the world. Paul got blamed for everything, and it's ironic because he was a huge Beatles fan. Paul was the Beatles fan, not John. Paul loved them.
Yeah.
Paul got blamed for breaking them out, and he hadn't done it. And then Paul rang me 2 weeks later. I was at home, and he rang me up and said, will you interview me, please? I said, what? And he said, to explain my side of the story. So we met in a place in Soho, and we did it, and we ran it over 2 days in the Evening Standard. So I was very lucky. I mean, I was there at the right time.
Did you interview Elvis Presley?
Kind of. It was more of an audition with the Pope. But I knew he was going to be on stage, and it was coming back on stage for the first time in Las Vegas. And a guy called Chris Hutchins, who you probably know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He fixed it, and I went to meet him. Terry O'Neill was with me, and Don Short.
Yeah.
From the Daily Mirror. So he went. Don wasn't going to write it, though. And Terry, I had a tape recorder. And because we suddenly get a call to go and see Elvis that second, I hadn't got my tape recorder on me. And Terry hadn't got his camera on him. So we oh, God. So we both go up there, or I think Don too, and sit down. Was it with Elvis? And Elvis couldn't have been actually more helpful. He'd have talked all night. But the Colonel sort of standing watching this, you know. And, you know, Elvis was... We were there about half an hour, and I asked most of the questions because the others were just sort of mucking about. It was a big joke for them. It wasn't a big story. For me, it was, why did you make those terrible films? Why don't you do these? Why didn't you?
And the Colonel was in the room. So how did the Colonel react when you were asking questions?
He looked a bit fed up, and he was sort of standing like this, and he was, and Elvis said something about. I've got it written down here. He said about how I wouldn't be being honest with you if I didn't admit that I was ashamed of some of the movies I've made. Now, my question should have been, well, why did you do them then? But he carried on and saying, well, I signed these contracts when I was in the army and, you know, I did all these things. And I'm thinking, later on, an older journalist, I was then about 27, an older journalist would have said, hang on a sec, let's go back over that. Why did you do it? You're Elvis Presley. You don't need to do these things. Because the curtain says you don't have to do it. You're bigger than that. Do you think that Paul Newman does things doesn't do what he wants?
Yeah.
And Elvis was that big. He could have done whatever he wanted, and he never did, because he didn't know anybody in Hollywood. He didn't know the best writers, the best directors, the best producers. He didn't know these things. He just did what he was told, which is kind of what a waste of talent. You know, I mean, he could do it, but best of all, he could make great records, and he didn't always. He made some terrible, terrible records. And I said something then about, well, you know, those awful records. I hope I didn't say awful, but I mean, I think he probably got the idea. I thought they were awful, you know. And
they're the most fantastic pieces. I was just rereading your back pages yesterday, and I wanted to quote something to you to give people the impression of just what astonishing attention to detail you had. You said here, this is something you wrote in 1967. I wonder if you remember writing this. You said, he is in his knocking about the house gear, puce pants and a clown's cravat to match, and a cosmic cotton shirt with stars and moons and other celestial objects printed on it. Round his waist is a sequined tassel belt, which he bought in the King's Road. He bought his socks in Marks and Spencer.
Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger?
Absolutely right. Mick Jagger in 1967. It's fantastic.
So does that mean you asked, I want to know this as a journalist, I want to know this. Did you ask Mick Jagger where he got his socks?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because
was he embarrassed to tell you it was Marks and Spencer?
Good work. Good work.
Yeah.
What
and not Granny takes a trip.
But he looks so ridiculous, you know. I mean, I'm probably in. I
love the way that's his knocking about the house gear.
Yeah.
A clown's cravat. You know?
I think for clowns on it. Anyway, but he was very. I never got on that well with Mick, to be honest. I never really broke through to him, and I met him several times. And never really, you know, it didn't kind of work.
Yeah, I don't think anybody does. I think
no one feels to get close.
He got a force field around him actually that keeps people away. Tell us about how you got from this to That'll Be the Day, which is obviously, you know, a huge thing in loads of people's memory. I mean, had that been cooking up for ages before it happened?
Not at all. Two people kept mentioning this guy called David Putnam. Twiggy did, who I'm quite friendly with, and Mike McCartney again. And Mike would come and stay with us quite a lot in London when we had a house in Kensington, and Mike would come and stay. And he always said, you should meet David Putnam. And eventually he arranged it. And I met him through Mike and his dad through Jim McCartney. And we became instant friends. We just got on. And suddenly I went to borrow a book on Elvis, from David, who bought it in New York. I knew about that. And he suddenly said, do you want to write a film for me? Well, I'd written film reviews for the Evening Standard, the odd one. And I'd also, at the university, I'd co-edited a film magazine. But I'd never even seen a film script, so I didn't know how to do it. He said, I'll tell you. So he did. And he'd come around for his break. And his great thing was that song by Harry Nilsson, 1941. Like Father Had a Son, that one, where the boy runs off to join the fair. Yeah. He said, maybe in the song, he runs off to join the circus.
So it's a circus, doesn't he? That's right, yeah.
Circus. He said, why not? He runs off to join the fair. And I said, because fairs were the place you could hear the music properly.
This is it. This is it. You could.
Yeah.
And so we were thinking, and we spent the rest of that day just sitting there talking about what could happen. And we sort of merged our, the film should have said story by Ray Connolly and David Putnam, or vice versa. Script by Ray Connolly. But David didn't want his name on it. He said, no, I'll be the producer. You do the writing. And he'd come to his breakfast every morning not every morning, about 3 mornings a week to see how I was getting on. And I'd be sort of working away like mad. And we sort of plotted the story together. And it was really a joint thing. Completely.
So the elements of your own lives in, what was it? Jim McClane, wasn't it, the character? Yeah.
Except I was much more like the other boy, the Robert Kennedy character.
You didn't run away, did you?
Who does the boring thing.
Yeah.
And Jim McClane was the one, I should have done that really. But I didn't. I did all the other things. So we did that. And but we did it. And also, it wasn't going to be a rock and roll film at the beginning.
Oh, really?
But we couldn't find the money for it. I mean, I had this sort of worthy film where he does all this, but we didn't fill it full of rock and roll music, no. And then David said, I've got this deal. David Putnam, got this deal. Well, there were two things. One day he rang up and our character doesn't do one nice thing in the entire film, not one decent thing at all. He's a real bastard, really, if you think about it. And we thought, we're never going to sell this. I mean, it might be accurate, but we're not going to sell it. And then David Putnam went to see David Essex in Godspell. And he ran out and said, I think we found our boy, because he's so good looking and so nice. People will forgive him anything, even and they did. And the other thing was that to raise the money for the film, he talked to Ronco Records. And if he said, if you can do a double album with 40 tracks on it, and he said, Raymond, can you write in 40 tracks? I said, I'll do whatever it takes, I'll do it. So on the fair, we have, 10 seconds of Sweet Little...
All the Buddy Holly, and that's right.
So he goes from one thing to the other, and we plotted it. Everything was plotted. So that when, after we finished, you put all these different tracks on, and that made a hell of a difference. Because then when the film came out, we got, pretty good reviews generally, apart from Barry Norman, who didn't like it, but generally pretty good reviews. And the film went out locally, and at the same time, it was on television every night in the commercials. And you sort of see these things, you see David S., and then you suddenly see Peggy Sue and all these, and that made a hell of a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, number one album, was it, for a long time?
Forever.
Yeah, forever, about 7 weeks, I think. But I've got a theory about that film, which is that sorry.
Well, I'm just going to say, over there's a Go record. I got a Go record for it. Right. But the only thing I did was help choose the songs.
Yeah, well.
We got a Go record. And David got one. We both got a Go record.
No, my theory about the film is that it came out, I think, exactly the same year as American Graffiti, 1973. And my theory is that those two films...
We hadn't seen American Graffiti.
No, that was completely coincidental, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And my feeling is that those two films started the whole idea of rock nostalgia.
Yeah.
Because the people who made them, you would have been how old? 33, I suppose, were now old enough to be writing about referencing their own teenage lives. Because American Graffiti was set in 1962, wasn't it? Do you think that's true? Because I remember it being the first time people were actually looking back at the past. Up till then, just been about the present.
It is true. I mean, it was... David Putnam said, it's about the day before yesterday.
Yeah.
And we always thought about that. And also, it was about our youth, about what we liked. And what created the Beatles? That's the other thing. What created that thing? And they didn't come out of nowhere. They came out of that exactly. So, yeah, it was, but, we're incredibly lucky. I mean, we really were incredibly lucky that it caught on. And people still talk about them, and they're still on television. And they're like cult films now.
Yeah, absolutely.
It cost £210,000 to make.
Yeah.
That'll be the day.
That's a couple of Beyonce tickets.
Yes, it is.
And it cost nothing. What did we do? And it was on the island. And the great thing was getting Ringo involved. That was pure luck.
Yes.
Because we thought of putting Ringo in with a small part, the part that Billy Fury has. We thought, we want someone who's got some attraction, maybe someone like Ringo. David said, "You'll do it." I said, "I don't know." He said, "Why don't you ask him?" So what we did, we arranged a lunch through remember Derek Taylor?
Yeah, Beatles press agent,
Yeah, he arranged a lunch with David Putnam, Ringo, me, Neil Aspinall himself.
Yeah.
We all sat there, and Ringo made us laugh.
That's quite a lunch. That's
quite God, that's a little documentary.
I just want to think about that for a minute, Ray.
The bon mot. The large balloon glasses of brandy.
I think we had sandwiches in Apple. And anyway, we sort of did it. And Ringo and Neil, they'd both been to Butlins. We hadn't. I'd never been to Butlins. And then they, on the way out, David Putnam, there was a big door at Apple, a big old-fashioned door, huge. I'll never forget it. And David said, do you think he might do it? And I said, well, I don't know. Perhaps he might do the other part too, which, the mic on the fair. He said, do you think he could? I said, I don't know. And what would I know? And so he said, well, we could ask him. So David asked him, and Mike and Ringo said, yeah, straight away, yes. And he wore the suit he'd had made specially for the Magical Mystery Tour thing. He turned up in his old Teddy Boy suit.
Old Ted gear.
He had especially made for the Magical Mystery Tour. And he turned up in that.
But anybody his age had a really powerful connection with that, didn't he? Because I can remember you saying that when you'd interviewed Elvis, I think you mentioned it to both John Lennon and Bob Dylan, and they'd been completely overcome. Was that right? You were interviewing Dylan and he suddenly said you've interviewed Elvis and wanted to know every detail about him, what he played?
It's not quite what happened with that was that I'd just been to see Elvis and I'm in love with the idea. And Elvis wasn't actually as good as he could have been.
Yeah.
He's better on the old CBS and NBC recordings. Everything was raced. I mean, it was good because he was Elvis. He was obviously going to be good. But he raced everything, which was a bit kind of disappointing for me. Anyway, yeah. But I'm full of that. And I go to New York, and Bob Dylan was coming over to do the Isle of Wight Pop Festival in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. So I called his manager, Al Goldman, was it?
Grossman. Albert Grossman.
With a ponytail. He said, why don't you come round, Ray? So I went round to his office and I told him what I wanted. And he said, well, I come from when Bobby gets to London, he'd be kind of busy. He won't have time for that. But we could call him. Do you want to call him? Do you want to call him now? Sally, will you get Bobby on the phone? Suddenly, I'm given the phone and Bobby is on the phone. I think, oh, God, what am I going to say? So I had no questions. I wasn't planning an interview. I suddenly said, I've just been to see Elvis. And straight away, Bobby, really? What did he do? I saw it in the New York Times. What did he do? Was Scotty Moore with him? Who was in the band?
Yeah, he was obsessed with him, wasn't he?
Yeah, all that. And straight away, you think, and we talked mainly about Elvis, actually, and a bit about his own family and stuff like that, and coming to London. But then I go back to England, and at the time, I was in touch with John Lennon quite a lot. And so I rang him and I had to tell him, didn't say Elvis, really excited. Same questions, exactly. Who was in the band? Did he do Hound Dog? Did he do Don't Be Cruel? Did he, same. And then you realize that these people, they're always fans of somebody who went before them, and they still are. And it never goes. Like I always will be a fan of the early Stones stuff, and they were.
Just going back to Stardust, which was the sequel to That'll Be the Day, and again, huge success. I always felt that created an image of rock stardom, the consequences of rock stardom that hadn't really existed before. The image of David Essex kind of alone in the white suit in the castle in Spain, his drug problems and his kind of isolation. I thought that was really interesting. Was any of that based on, because you wrote a book about Elvis, was any of that based on the idea of what had was happening to Elvis?
Not so much Elvis, but everybody else. I mean, I'd interviewed Janis Joplin, and I remember for that film, David Putnam, I went with David Putnam's family to Spain. To Italy. Yeah, and we were sitting in the sun, and we were talking about, how the rock stars always had these massive, incredible houses and things. And I just flown over Italy and looked down And I thought, yeah, it'd be a great castle in Italy or something. It became Spain in the end, but that idea was there. But also how they always bought things way beyond that they were ever going to need. But the other thing was, I'd also written obituaries. I'd met Janis Joplin about a year before she died, and I'd met Jim Morrison. I didn't know him, but the Isle of Wight Festival, and he was just here next to me. And all these other people, and so David Putnam and I were both anti-drugs. And I saw it all the time around me, and I thought, well, it can't be good, and so we had this idea we'd actually end it, we'd do it. Before we were shooting, we'd had such a big hit with That of the Day, we thought maybe we should keep him alive and do a third.
There you go.
Yes.
Because, it's a good, in these days, it's a good franchise.
Absolutely.
We didn't know that then, but we said, no, let's do it because it's a great ending. And we found this castle. I went to find the castle in Spain with Michael Apted, the director, and we went and found lots of castles. Then when you see this one, it has to be that one. It was so remote and so...
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And so fantastic and all that. All those things, a lot of luck involved, I mean, really. I mean, I didn't know that so many people were going to die, but the age of 27 was the age people kept dying in rockstar world. And I'd written the obits, Jimi Hendrix.
You interviewed Hendrix, didn't you?
Yeah, a really lovely guy, quietly spoken, all these things. And then suddenly, apparently, he died of an overdose. And then the awful thing is Keith Moon, who we had on in Stardust, actually, and That of the Day too, but mainly Stardust. He, I remember seeing him in the King's Road, and I never go in bars, but I did go in some club there, the Aretusa, remember that? And,
right, yeah.
And Keith came in, and I need to knock something over. Keith came in, and his arms around me, Raymond, yeah? Then throwing pills in the air and swallowing them like a seal, And I thought, this isn't good. And a week later, he was dead, drugs overdose. And on Keith Moon, the funny story about Keith Moon was when we were doing Stardust, I mean, in the middle of the night, we were filming in Bellevue in Manchester. And Keith could be really hard work sometimes. I mean, it was funny, very funny. He did really funny things. It
sounded exhausting.
Yeah, he was exhausted. But he put his head at one point. He got a saw off the carpenter, unit carpenter, and sawed his hotel door in half, and then put his head over like that, smiling at you. Well, it's funny, but of course we had to pay for it. The film had to pay for all these things. And then one night he said something to me, and I said, "Oh, fuck off, Keith. What did you say to me?" I said, "Fuck off." He came to hit me. And as he did, I fell back thinking, oh my God. I'm on some stairs, the stairs outside Bellevue, carpeted. And I fell back and he fell across me. I began to hit him. And all of a sudden, all the unit assistants, the crew, they jumped on him, said, and the makeup guy said, "Don't hit his face, he's been made up." hit anything else you want, not his face. But he was, the next day, best of friends. But he could be a real bore sometimes.
I can well imagine. Imagine. Who's the most impressive musician you've interviewed, dealt with, met?
Joni Mitchell was extraordinary. I mean, she's just a very clever woman. We didn't get on.
Why didn't you get on?
I kept asking personal questions, and her manager was there, and he also managed Neil Young and
Elliot Roberts.
Yeah, Elliot Roberts, and he was there, and he kept stopping me, and he said, "That's personal." I said, "Well, that's what I do. I talk to people about their childhoods." And anyway, it didn't get on well, and I only realised 20 years later that she didn't want to talk about her teenage years because she had a baby.
Yeah, that's right.
But I didn't know. And right. I think he thought, out of some tough tabloid journalist who was going to try and wheedle something out of her.
He probably thought you knew what you were looking for.
Yeah, probably thought that's what you were driving towards.
And I didn't. I just wanted to know about her.
Why was she so impressive?
Oh God, the lyrics are so clever and so worked. And there's that one about the portrait, about how you painted a portrait about me, and then you've gone off and you're living in Los Angeles where it's sunny, and I'm still here with the portrait. And they were just, and also Both Sides Now is a fantastic song.
Yeah.
Really clever people, and this is what I thought at the time. I thought that she's a really clever woman, and then she explained how writing "You Pay Paradise," that one, put in the parking lot, and she explained how to come about, and I thought, there's a lot to this woman, and a lovely voice. I didn't like her later version of Both Sides Now as much as the first one, because when she first sang it, her voice was that lovely soprano that just suddenly shoots up. It's really exciting. I thought she was great. Tell you who, one of the most impressive people I ever met was Dave Edmunds, who did the music for that.
Right. Oh, right, the Stray Cats. Yeah. That's right.
But that was before this. We called our band the Stray Cats. We didn't know about the other Stray Cats, but he did everything. So in a way, Keith Moon was probably justified in being a bit fed up because he was miming on film.
Yeah, Dave
Edmunds playing the drums. So that would be a bit tough for a good drummer. But Dave could do anything. I remember taking him a little cassette where I'd sang a song called Stray Cat Blues. We needed, I think, 2 more songs. So I wrote them. They weren't any good. They were no good. But he just listened to it and he said, "Oh, do you mean like this?" And he began playing it. And then he said, "I will put the bass on and the drums on." And I watched him, and within an hour, he'd recorded the whole thing. He could play anything. Just him and me in a studio in Wales somewhere. Yeah. And it was so impressive. Clever guy.
Have you ever been in a band or made music yourself?
No.
Just been happy to watch other people do it?
No. I wished I'd been in a band, but I never had the confidence. People, I think to get up there, you've got to be good. They're not all good, but also...
Well, you don't have to be good. You have to have confidence, don't you?
Confidence. But you
have to feel you belong there.
But I thought I'd be a lead singer always, obviously. But we'll do that. We'll think that I'd be a lead singer, wouldn't I? Obviously. Yeah. But I think you've got to have a lot of guts to get up there and sing. And, so I never did. And also, I did stammer incredibly badly. I can't tell you how bad it was. I really couldn't. What's that?
Sorry, that's my machine.
Yeah. And so I was quite a sort of... Why I got a job as an interviewer, I'll never know, because they gave me one. Because I guess I could do it.
Can we ask you about Muhammad Ali too? Because that was a pretty significant person to have met and interviewed at the time.
It was, yeah.
On a train going to the north of England somewhere, was it?
Yeah, he was. He just lost to, I think, he fought Joe Frazier twice.
Yeah.
First time he lost, the second time he won. And we were sitting on the train. But he was lying long ways on one of those old-fashioned things where you have sort of 2 bunks facing each other. He's lying on one in a carriage. And he never opened his eyes once. He was really bored. He didn't want to do it. And now I can't stand the idea of boxing, but then he made it fashionable. He made it exciting because he was so quick and witty and funny and clever, all these things. And but he just lay there and he made unkind things about Joe Frazier, who I actually met too, who was a lovely guy. But
yeah.
Ali, on that day, he wasn't great. And he made jokes about it. He'd just been to Nigeria, where the president had said that he'd boxed too. And Ali apparently said to him, "What did you box? Apples or oranges?" Something like that, And it was and he didn't open his eyes. And it was disappointing. And I wished I'd met him later in a better situation, because he was a really interesting guy. And I didn't get it. I got a boring piece. Joe Frazier, on the other hand, was fantastic. I mean, he'd just come back from running around Hyde Park, and he was stripped of the waist and the tracksuit bottoms, and he lay in the bed, go bang, and hitting his hands like this, to emphasize everything. And it was deep as well as wide. He was huge, but not very tall, but big. And he was sad. He was a really sad, lovely guy. I mean, he was just a very, very nice man. And
who did you interview who was least like how you imagined they were going to be? Who was the most surprisingly different?
I don't know about. There were some people I didn't like. I did Tony Curtis, and he was lovely to me, great to me, and then he behaved very rudely to some minion. And an older journalist would have written that part, and I didn't do that, and I should have written that part really, because it was awful. I mean, it's terrible to sort of, and that happened a few times when people would turn on the charm for the journalist.
Yeah.
And then
you see him off guard.
Yeah, and then Michael Winner, do you remember Michael Winner?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
He was on the phone.
Legendarily unpopular.
he was on the phone to somebody in Los Angeles who hadn't picked up his girlfriend, whoever he was at the time.
Yeah.
And he was incredibly rude and nasty and foul-tongued and everything about this guy. And then he turns back to me, what were we saying, Ray? And I didn't write it. And I made a mistake. I got it wrong. So I didn't get them all right, you know. I mean,
well, you're always worried about, you know, affecting the relationship between the publication and the people or the agent or whatever. So those things are complicated, aren't they?
Well, but I shouldn't have been, because by then I had, you know, I was given complete freedom. I gave them the space to do whatever I wanted.
Yeah.
I wasn't taking it. I suppose that I was grateful to be doing the interviews, and a bit, you know, yeah. I've thought about it quite a lot since.
Yeah.
You're still write now, right?
Yeah, all the time.
What sort of things?
I've written a book called Kill for Love, which is a novel, and I'm always interested in the way it's here. It's Kill for Love, wonderful book. In the way fans are a cult, or they can become a cult, and the way music can be used for other things. Music is used to entertainment, to all our parts in life. It's there for things. It also can be used for bad purposes, and it is in war. It's used for, you know. So I wanted to write a book about that. I thought, what could happen if a rock star becomes involved with a darker side? And it's told to the point of view of a woman journalist for television who gets involved herself and doesn't realize what she's getting involved with. And then this guy is not a good guy. I mean, you know, we always assume that really, you know, they're pretty innocuous people, really, rock stars. But maybe sometimes they're not. And you know, so I read about all these cults and things, and these terrible things in, you know, where people mass suicide and things. And so Waco, Texas, all these sort of things. I thought, well, maybe, you know, what could happen? What, you know, so it's about that. It's called Kill for Love. And yeah.
Kill for Love. It's available now.
You say
as we say.
In all good bookshops.
Yes.
No, not in bookshops, because I don't have an agent anymore. So it's now only available on Amazon commercial.
Right. Okay, well, you look it up on Amazon. So we traditionally finish these chats by asking people to tell us, what is the greatest record ever made? Do you know the answer to that question, Ray? I feel you do.
Well, I'm torn now. It could be Neil Young.
Go on, give us both. Give us the options.
I think Harvest is pretty high up.
Oh, right.
I like Harvest. But, you know, for me, the greatest record ever made would have to be Elvis's first album, the English version, because in America, I think this is the American version, actually, it is. But the English one it was just full of fantastic things, Trying to Get to You, and Left Your Right She's Gone and Mystery Train. And it was incredible. I mean, there were all the old stunt things that he'd done earlier, which were all crammed together on one album. And for me, they can play that at my funeral. Well, they probably will actually, but they could, and I'd be happy.